I'm really excited to welcome you all, whether you're virtual or here in person. For those that are here in person, if you feel sluggish from lunch, feel free to stand up, walk around throughout the presentation. Totally happy for that. We may or may not throw candy from the front from Dr. Beal over here, so look out. Some minties, exactly. Thank you so much for coming to our session. My name is Kabir Thate. I am Vice President of Policy and External Relations at DigDeep, a human rights nonprofit based in the US, working for the US for the millions of people that don't have any clean running water or sanitation in their homes. Also have the privilege of serving as the executive director of the Vessel Collective, which is a large national coalition focused on achieving the systems change needed to be able to get to the root causes of why the water access gap exists in the United States. So if you're in here on purpose or wandered in here by accident or logged into the wrong field, this session today is going to cover why gaps persist in high-income nations. So for many people that come to these conferences, many people in the international WASH space, we sort of think of the multi-billions of folks that are facing water insecurity issues around the world. But you may be surprised to hear, or you may not be, that high-income countries have not achieved universal access in their home countries, much to maybe the thought of folks that are global. Many colleagues of mine, I also thought that probably pre-2019, that we did not face a water security issue in the United States at the least, but more research we've done, we've only been able to collaborate with friends globally, more we realize that's simply just not true. And to couch our conversation today, I want to give a quick global context into what we're discussing, and we're going to be really excited to get into wonderful presentations by my colleagues here on various contexts around the world. We'll head into a moderated Q&A and then an open Q&A for the audience to be able to join and enrich our discussion here today. So for some global context, just as we're looking at it, like I said, it's a myth that whether you call them high-income countries, the global north, the developed world, whatever you want to call it, whatever outdated or modernized language you may be using, has not achieved universal water and sanitation access. The problem also exists that it may be growing as we're moving forward. Unsurprisingly, there are going to be commonalities globally into how countries may be facing, approaching, or exacerbating this issue. And just to couch it in a little bit of context, if you look in the United States, there's over 2 million Americans that lack running water and sanitation in their homes. Those are families without piped connections. Those are families that are having to dump sewage out of their homes into their backyards, into rivers and streams. Those are people that are living on Native American reservations or on the border, other communities where they have to drive 30, 40, 50 miles. I apologize, I don't know the kilometer switch up there, but they're driving, very, very far to be able to get their daily water needs. That's for bathing, that's for cooking, it's for everything you could possibly need. A privilege that many of us probably don't have to think about coming from our hotel today, just turning on the tap, turning on the shower, flushing your toilet. And if you look at the global context in other places, in Australia, tap water in more than 500 remote indigenous communities are not regularly tested and also not safe to drink. And that's from a study Dr. Beal and colleagues of hers did, so she'll get into more of the indigenous and Aboriginal impact in Australia. Looking at Canada, First Nations communities are 90 times more likely to lack running water than white Canadian communities. Put that context in your head. I can't visualize that in a strong enough way, but knowing what it's like, knowing where these communities are going to be, I'm going to touch upon the root causes in the next slide, but just giving that context, it's 90 times in Canada, it's 19 times in the United States. And if you're looking at some other countries, especially in Europe that you're thinking of, may have achieved universal access, there are impending newer problems that are happening as time goes on. In the United Kingdom alone, last year was at 20%, this year it's at 21% of residents can't afford their monthly water bills, and that's putting them further into debt. If you're looking at exacerbated problems either by global diplomacy issues or ongoing modern pieces that are kind of moving in the future, we have unhoused issues growing globally, and particularly in richer nations. The United States has several 100,000 people that are unhoused, that's an estimate. The EU has several hundred thousand people that are unhoused, that's a growing issue. And then with communities and countries that are welcoming migrants, you're seeing migrant populations, newer migrant camps communities that are facing water insecurity issues, whether it's lack of access entirely or insecurity as it moves on. Unsurprisingly, there are commonalities for a lot of these communities. These historical disparities are not surprising, right? They're often communities of color. They're often indigenous, Aboriginal, or First Nations communities. They're very, in most cases, often low-income communities, rural communities, those that have historically either been left behind from the beginning or forgotten as time has gone on. And I want to just quickly touch base on a few pieces that perpetuate the gap, a few of the issues that seem to be ongoing. These main categories that we branch them out into are geographic and environmental factors, economic and governance factors, historical and social factors. There's a million pieces that you could fit into each of these buckets, but kind of a few major ones that I'll jump into. On geographic and environmental, you have folks that are facing physical isolation in a lot of cases, particularly indigenous or rural communities, where either they're remote, they may be sparsely populated, they face disproportionately high per household costs for water and sanitation because it is naturally more expensive to provide running water and sanitation. That's due to also a technological issue. When we're not providing alternative solutions to centralized systems, we're perpetuating a gap because those folks don't have a middle ground or a short-term solution until we can find out how to install longer-term ones. There's also hydrogeologic realities, different types of terrain, whether it's desert, mountain, or fractured bedrock aquifers in different places do exacerbate these issues. It makes engineering approaches difficult, right? We have systems that are in place. Operations and maintenance are difficult to envision for systems that aren't as common. And yeah, just natural geological differences make these issues more perpetuated. I also mentioned climate-related impacts. I do want to take a moment to recognize, obviously, this impending 100-year hurricane that is currently happening in Jamaica. I also want to recognize the Alaskan Native villages that were wiped out by a recent storm that happened last week. A lot of villages, few of us know, and friends that are up there were forced to relocate due to weather that was unexpected. Even North Carolina just last year experienced hurricane-like conditions in communities that never would have expected it. So climate-related impacts continue to grow. On to the second bucket, economic and governance factors. There's many multiple pieces here, but poverty and limited local capacity continue to impact pieces, whether it's staffing capacity, expertise, qualified workforce, but also long-term sustainability and investment into the workforce. In the United States alone, the workforce is aging much faster than we have a replenishment service to be able to get folks into those positions. Similar conversation is happening internationally, right? How can we make sanitation more attractive, more accessible for any community to be able to take pride in as a major part of why a community works? Globally complex and fragmented governance is really clear. Using the United States context alone, we have somewhere between 50,000 and 150,000 independent utilities in our country. That's not a very manageable system, especially when the United States does not have a central regulator of water. We have many different agencies that are focused on that world. But around the world, there are other fragmented systems that are contributing to it as well, whether it's support on bigger utilities and lack of support for smaller ones, but that's a common theme globally. And then chronic underinvestment also is an issue in high-income nations, and particularly for the communities that I mentioned at the beginning. These were either entirely not invested in, these are communities that they just never put systems in, or over time, these systems may have been private, may have been dependent on industry, may have been dependent on a more booming populated town. And as depopulation happened, as deindustrialization may have happened in particular communities, their ability to be able to pay for their systems or maintain them or rely on something was not filled by the government. Lastly, historical and social factors. There is, as it is in technical expertise, a preference for centralized solutions as a major piece. But for everything that I mentioned in the first column in terms of geography, in terms of even culture, in terms of being able to react and adapt to any situation, especially the United States, it's a very, very diverse place. And that is both in terms of cultures, peoples, but also especially in terms of being able to install infrastructure in different communities. And that lack of support for decentralized solutions, whether it's investment or technical support, workforce development, or even a local utility not having the capacity or time to invest in learning how to operate a decentralized system, we're going to have to catch up sooner than later. Historical exclusion and discrimination, I've kept that as kind of an underpinning piece, so I won't belabor that further. But last piece I wanted to end on is issue and visibility. I mean, this is the perfect place to be able to talk about components like this, but we need to make sure that water access around the globe is not left in a silo. Obviously, there are huge issues that are ongoing in low and middle income countries, and no one here on this panel or in this room at this conference is suggesting that there needs to be a dissolution of that or taking away from that issue. But I stand firm, and I think many colleagues have spoken with at this conference, stand firm that while we're also helping the world, we need to make sure that we don't leave anybody behind in the countries that we live in, especially as rich as we are. So to leave millions behind in these gaps isn't an acceptable piece. So tell your friends, tell your family, look into the issue whatever country you might be from. We are excited to investigate this problem further in different communities around the globe, different countries around the globe. Our focus today, based on the expertise we have, are going to be looking at the United States, helping benchmark the context that we have here, looking at it in Australia as well, as I mentioned, with particularly Aboriginal communities and communities that have been impacted. We'll also take a global context, so we'll look at it at the highest level, kind of seeing what the importance of policies look like and why, at the end of the day, what the water access gap, no matter what country you're in, is also a policy gap. There's a reason that it exists. There's a reason that it continues. And we're also very lucky to be able to learn from kind of a reversed approach. We'll be looking at a low and middle income country reversal so that we as high income countries can understand why are the newer projects, why are the newer sources of collective action working well. So we'll be investigating Ethiopia and some other contexts as well to see maybe for anyone that's in the room from the US, Australia, Canada, the UK, or Europe, what can we learn from contexts in Africa especially that we could take back home, whether it's a collective action element, it might be a policy, maybe a framework that we could be inspired by, because the only way to be able to move forward is learning from any and all sources. And I'm willing to work with anyone that may be able to help us solve the problems, especially when you look at some of the geographic, cultural, and other historic contexts that exist in high-income countries. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first presenter today, Dane Hansen. Dane Hansen is the Executive Vice President of Government Relations at the International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials, you may know him as IAPMO, where he oversees international, federal, legislative, and state policy initiatives impacting the plumbing industry in the United States and abroad. Dane also serves as the executive management of IAPMO's nonprofit arm, IWISH, or the International Water, Sanitation, Hygiene Foundation, and he also serves on the board of directors for DigDeep and the Alliance for Water Efficiency. So Dane will take a global look and a US look as to why the water access gaps are perpetuated. Dane.
So like Kabir mentioned, my name's Dane Hansen, and I think many of you probably don't even know who IAPMO is. So I think I spend a couple minutes educating you a little bit about who we are. So we are about a 100-year-old trade association or federation. We started in 1926, and essentially we develop model building and construction codes. So we develop many of the countries and states that you live in have the basis foundation for construction codes, plumbing codes. So we're developers of the Uniform Plumbing Code, the Uniform Mechanical Code, and others. And those are all adjusted, as you probably know, for climatic needs, climatic changes, like the code in Florida is different than the code in California versus the one in Arizona, and culturally and internationally as well. You know, our codes are used in the Middle East and in Amman, Jordan, used in other parts of the country like Indonesia. And so they're not always just plug and play, so they need to be adjusted. So we work closely with AHJs, or authorities having jurisdiction, which are the bodies which adopt these codes. So that's part of what we do. We also do certification and testing of products. So many of you, if you are familiar, if you looked at your shower head or your sink today or your pipes, you probably saw a certification mark. That certification mark probably says UPC certified or IAPMO certified or IAPMO R&T, and we certify products throughout the world. We have laboratories in China, India, Australia, Mexico, United States, where people and products get sent to us, where the manufacturers send us their products. It could be a water filtration system to a pipe, to a filter. We test it to make sure it actually does what it says it's going to do. And what we're seeing in a lot of these, LMICs is that there are many products being flooded in these markets that do not meet any reliable, safe standard. And even in high-income countries, there are areas where these codes and standards and practices are not being enforced at all. So that's one area that we really touch on heavily within IAPMO. We're global partners with, governing bodies from the U.S. Water Partnership, the World Trade Organization, USTR, USAID, now State Department, and many others, to be able to try to address these issues. So, but one of the things we also do is personnel qualification, so PQ credentialing, for people to be able to learn how to, it's easy to come in and drop a system in place. And then if that organization disappears, how does that become sustainable if people are not embedded in those communities to help train and change it? So as an example, one thing that IAPMO and our charitable arm, IWISH, did was we worked with the Navajo Technical University here in the United States, where we developed a plumbing certificate course. This was an area because you're talking about very rural parts of the United States. And this is not unique to the United States. Same thing happens with First Nations and the Aboriginal communities in Australia. They're very rural. They don't have the trades, the crafts in their communities to be able to fix the systems. There was a woman, we worked on a project in Navajo Nation a few years ago where we went in and developed, renovated systems because these people hadn't had running water for years. And there was a woman who, I think she got water for the first time in her home, and she was 84 years old or 86 years old. And that was the first time she's ever had running water in her home. Another gentleman actually, he actually passed away now, but when we were working on his home, he had his water shut off because there was during a major freeze one year, one of the pipes under his house burst and they shut down the water. And he didn't have the money and they didn't have the skills to turn it off. So it was turned off for 30 years simply because of a cracked pipe. So you're talking about they don't have the infrastructure and things needed to be able to get there. So we worked with the Navajo Technical University to create a plumbing certificate course so these people in these communities can actually go and actually be trained. They can learn how to put these systems together. They can learn how to build them themselves, so then they now have a new trade. They have a craft. They have a skill, makes them more marketable, makes them have the opportunity to get a job, but it also gives them the skills in those communities to be able to continue to fix the systems that need repair. So we do that, but we also, that's at an entry level, an entry level plumbing certificate course. But we also, have an entire division of our organization that just focuses on personnel qualifications for maintaining your CEU credits. So whether it be you're an architect, an engineer, you can come and learn how, our entire education division works on the properly installation of rainwater catchment systems, a water reuse system. All these, you have to be certified. You have to get these credentials to be legitimately and to be able to run these well. And then finally, like I mentioned about, is the plumbing code, the products, and the people. Those three things together really make it a sustainable model for communities to be able to get water and sanitation access. If you have one of those missing, you may have short-term gains in those communities, but you're not going to have a sustainable solution. You may come in with a great product that meets a certification, that meets safety, it's not contaminating people with lead or other pathogens, but the moment that product breaks down or ends, then what? They don't have the skills, they don't have the people there. And if they don't have the basic foundational structure of governance, the regulations or the legislation or the mandates from their local government or state government, they're never going to meet those. They're not going to be able to meet those basic systems. So we contribute our technical expertise throughout the world to be able to work in these communities, to be able to work in the United States as an example, and in Australia, sometimes they're very locally driven. Some of these codes and standards and practices are adopted and mandated at the city level. Some are at the county level. If you look at Texas, you have jurisdictions that it's not a statewide mandate. It is very, patchwork. And if you look at the Navajo Nation and other communities, like you'll look at it and it truly is a patchwork. You'll have federal land, then you'll have Navajo land, then you'll have New Mexico, but to get a line from one side to the other, you're cutting through 3, 4, 5 jurisdictions, and trying to get that done becomes a bureaucratic malaise and you just can't get it done. So we try to work across those boundaries to try to get the systems in place, not only like in the United States and other developed countries, but throughout the world. So I just wanted to leave that with you really quick, and we'll get into more discussion today on some of the systemic issues that we see throughout the world of how it is reasonable. You know, in the United States, like we talked about, in 100 years, we've reached 99% of the population in water. Now we have about 1% left. And how do we get that 1% to 2% remaining of the population water? That's the most difficult part to get right now. So looking forward to more of the discussion, and turn back to Kabir.
Thank you, Dane. Really appreciate it. So next up, we will be going to Wendy Wilkes, who, if I was prepared, I'd have her bio sitting right in front of me. It's funny, because Wendy and I are friends, so I know her very well, so I could probably just memorize your bio, but I'm going to read it. Wendy serves as Executive Vice President at Current Strategies, where she leads strategic advocacy and policy engagement across infrastructure, water, and the environmental sectors. She's a former presidential appointee at the U.S. EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, where she oversaw implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law and helped direct $50 billion in investments to modernize the nation's water systems. Her career spans leadership in state and federal government, regulatory strategy, as well as coalition development, and she leads efforts to align policy, investment, and innovation to create long-term solutions for the United States' infrastructure and water challenges.
Wow, that was nice. Did you edit that? I don't remember seeing that. That was I'm listening like, wow, that's great. No, thank you, Kabir, for the introduction. Thank you to my panelists. Thanks for organizing this. I'm excited to be here. This is not my normal circle of folks. I'm normally talking to water utilities and state governments, federal government. You might be wondering, what the hell is a lobbyist doing here at this WASH convening? But yes, that's my current title. I'm a lobbyist working on behalf of clean water. We do exist. There's a couple of us in Washington, D.C. who are trying to fight the good fight, communicating with our federal government, both the congressional side, the administration side, as well as state governments, to continue to push for progress when it comes to water policy in the United States. So it's really great to be here with you all. And as my fellow panelists have highlighted, you know, when we're talking about universal access to safe water, sanitation, the United States doesn't normally appear on the list of countries that are working towards that goal, right? But as we've talked about already, more than 2 million Americans still live without reliable access to water. And I'll say too, we have millions more that are facing either unsafe, unaffordable, or failing water systems that are currently providing water and wastewater services to their homes. You know, in the United States, the infrastructure that was built 100 years ago is quickly coming to the end of its useful life, and it's coming fast, and it's coming all at once. So that's really fun for us. And there are major inequities across the communities. Private well users, they sit well outside of any of our governance structure, right? We have small systems that continually struggle with the existing regulations, much less what's coming down with some of our emerging contaminants. So it's I hate to paint such a grim picture, but I think there are real highlights of progress across the United States, you know, hopefully we can get into some of that today. So, you know, I think for a nation that's helped develop the modern governance system for water, it's surprising that there are still so many without consistent, affordable access to these water services. And it definitely gives me pause. I started my career in Texas. I was working in the height of the drought of the last decade. And, you know, I saw all sorts of communities come face to face with the reality of not having water supply and what that does to a community, the stress that that puts on an individual, on a farmer, on the livelihood of a community. It's, I know the economists will probably disagree. I feel it's inquantifiable. It is really, it's a pervasive issue in the United States. It's well hidden. And so I think having conversations like this are really what we need to continue to drive progress. So I'm going to start with just talking a little bit about the policy foundation, especially for those who might not be operating in the United States. We have two landmark laws that shaped the United States water policy. Both are over 50 years old. They were put in place in the 1970s by US EPA, well, by Congress, and are implemented by the US EPA. This was during the environmental decade of the 70s, and we had the Clean Water Act, which came first, and that really governs the nation's rivers, lakes, streams, our surface waters, and it was a monumental step for human health. We had rivers on fire, right? We're past some of that, which is fantastic. I hope we don't return. It's a little nerve-wracking every day waking up with what we have going on in Washington now. But it did give us our environmental North Star, which is our waters should be swimmable and fishable, right? So that is what we are striving for every day under the Clean Water Act. A couple of years later, we had the Safe Drinking Water Act, and that established the national drinking water standards, and it really built the current governance system we have that is based on federalism when it comes to our drinking water. And that's a state and federal partnership where EPA sets the standards, the states implement the standards, localities are on the ground trying to meet those standards. And that's where we have like our local water utilities. It specifically addressed the safety of the public drinking water. You know, we talked a little bit about the number of public water systems in the United States. There are 150,000 public water systems, which is an insane number. Of those, 50,000 are community water systems. So those are the ones that are supplying your homes, your businesses, your schools, for the most part, every day on a daily basis. So really that 50,000 is kind of the universe that we're talking about. Others might be, it's serving a gas station and no one's actually drinking that water, but it's regulated as a public water system because they have a hose, right? So like there's these other systems that are a little bit different. But for the most part, most people are getting their water from the 50,000 public water systems. Still a huge number, far too large in my opinion. But the Safe Drinking Water Act helps define who has responsibility when it comes to running the public water systems. However, it also highlights a major weakness we have in the United States, which is that there is no one entity that is responsible for providing water to a home. It is the homeowner's responsibility to go find that water, or if they live in an area where there is a water supplier, to pay for the connection to get connected. So that is how our system is set up. And as I mentioned, right, the private wells are beyond this. They are not a part of this governance structure. Some states do a little bit of private well regulation, but if you have a private well, you're kind of on your own. And the same is true on the sanitation side. It is the responsibility of ultimately the homeowner to figure out some of these really massive infrastructure problems. So the laws, these two laws kind of built the framework that all of our water regulations have been built on. And in my mind, they were really built for like the 20th century problems. Industrial pollution, big cities coming up and trying to make sure typhoid and cholera aren't being spread right through their drinking water. Centralized systems, you talked a little bit about like the bias against decentralized options. And, I think we are now at a point where we're struggling a bit because the challenges look a lot different when you look at PFAS, microplastics, climate change, the level of aging infrastructure we have in this country. I don't know that these laws are as adaptable as they need to be for us to really meet these challenges head on. So that's the first part, right? That's the foundation that we're on. I want to mention quickly, we had a huge wave of investment. It's ongoing right now. It's the largest federal investment in water infrastructure in the United States in the modern era, probably ever. I don't know for sure. I haven't done the calculations to see what a dollar was worth in 1885. But in 2001, President Biden signed into law the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And this was kind of a generational reset for us. It was extremely exciting. And under this law, we had the $50 billion, most of that going through state infrastructure banks called the state revolving funds that put out loans and grants to communities across the country to help with clean water and drinking water infrastructure issues. They're replacing lead pipes, aging infrastructure, addressing PFAS in particular was called out. The other thing that we did as we were implementing this was we said, okay, look, we know the money is great. We know there are so many communities who have no idea how to get the money. So how do we bridge that? So as a part of that, the administration decided to focus on technical assistance. And this is a bit of a departure for EPA, which is normally focused on compliance and enforcement of these laws. So this was a shift. And thank you, sir. We instituted technical assistance that helped connect a lot of these systems to the funding. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit about the structural challenge. The 50,000 independent community water systems is insane. And when you think about the governance of that, you have fractures at every level. So we have EPA, which does these 2 laws on water, and they also do a couple of others on like marine water. But then you also have the Army Corps of Engineers. You have NOAA that gets involved on the data side. You have USGS. You have the Bureau of Reclamation. We have this like huge fracture at the federal level when it comes to how we govern water. Okay, great. Bring that down to the state level. We then have 50 states that are implementing the Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act. Sometimes that's the same agency in a state. Sometimes it's a different agency. Okay, great. We have 102 different organizations that are then implementing that. And that's just one piece of the water governance. So you can see how quickly the responsibility is diffused. And I think that is one of our biggest issues that we have to tackle here. Because the fragmentation means that when a crisis hits, like Jackson, Mississippi, or Flint, Michigan, it is everybody's responsibility, and it is also simultaneously nobody's responsibility, right? The buck is continually passed. And the courts are dealing with some of that, but this is a major problem that I see in the way we've structured our governance. However, when we see government treat access as a shared commitment, progress follows, right? We've seen this in California, which formally recognized the human right to water. They also paired that with investments in physical infrastructure, some regulatory changes, and investments in research to highlight this issue, so amazing. And then we saw it in Kentucky, of all places, where the governor decided to use some funding from the tobacco settlements in like the late 90s to really fund investment into their water systems. And they are, I think, close to universal access in Kentucky, which is incredible. So what are the takeaways here? Sustained investment, scaling technical assistance, investing in research that highlights this issue and shows paths forward, and then investing in the physical infrastructure. So I'm hoping we can dig in. I feel like this was so high level, so I'm hoping we can dig in. I hope you guys are thinking about good questions, because I only got through like half my content, so lots more to say here, but I'll pass it back off to Kabir.
I'm the jerk that has to keep everything on time. Please give a hand to Wendy. Actually, please keep giving a hand to Wendy, because I have to pull up Dr. Beal's presentation, so. Thank you, Wendy. So Dan and Wendy got to hit us on some familiar context, perhaps for many of you at the US level, some contexts that are also familiar on the global level. I'm sorry, the way that these computers are structured make me not able to see. Am I close? Yeah. There we go. All right, great, did it. So we got some familiar context with the US for many of you that may work in this context. We got familiar context in the global level and being able to see it at scale and how it moves. Now we're gonna go to the other side of the globe. We're very lucky to be able to have Dr. Cara Beal here with us. Dr. Beal is the director of the Griffith Institute for Human and Environmental Resilience. As an environmental scientist of 30 plus years, working predominantly in the water and sustainability sector, Dr. Beal applies systems thinking and transdisciplinary approaches to tackle such topics as environmental health, water, sanitation, and hygiene, as well as for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's environmental health. As a land Indigenous researcher, Cara does not speak on behalf of the First Nations people, but does aim to undertake a two-way, applied, co-created, and community-oriented research to improve the security of water and energy in First Nations communities. Dr. Bill live edited this bio as Wendy was speaking, so thank you for condensing it. So impressive resume. And yeah, give a big shout out to Dr. Bill. She came all the way from Australia and just got here 2 days ago, so thank you.
Thank you. And for the last, thank you very much, Kabir. For the last couple of days, I've gone away and had a quick nana nap at about this time of the day. So this is, I'll just get my notes. This is a challenge. No, thank thank you very much for inviting me onto the panel, and it's lovely to be here and meet the other panellists and all of you here today. So in Australia, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we are situated on or that we might work on. And for me, I'm in Mianjin, which is Brisbane, and that is home of the Turrbal and the Yugara nations. So I just wanted to, and there's many, many nations. There's about 156 or so different languages. I've probably got that wrong, but different Indigenous languages across Australia. So what I will do today is just to give a little bit of a historical view of how water has been managed in Australia, and then really touch on what has already been mentioned in everyone else's presentation. So I should just say ditto and sit back down. But really, as you identified, really common barriers and challenges, but hopefully we can talk about the positives and some of those solutions or positive approaches. So, as I said earlier, I was in a panel earlier today, our First Nations communities are the oldest enduring culture in the world. The photo here is the Brewarrina fish traps, and that is the oldest man-made structure in the world, where you can see it is simple but complex, but for many, many, many tens of thousands of years, that has been used to capture fish and other food sources in the Brewarrina lakes in the Gamilaroi region. So really, up until colonisation, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, so we've got two different major First Nations groups together collectively. We term them Indigenous peoples. It always changes as to what's the preferred term. But when I say Indigenous people, it's Aboriginal and more mainland, and Torres Strait Islander more Torres Strait Island communities. So they were really sustained the health of country and community. Rivers, wetlands, billabongs, marine contexts, seas, oceans, etc. Really, they were part of country, and country was part of all of those communities. And then, of course, colonisation came into play about 200 years ago, and really ever since then there's been quite a fragmented and disempowerment within those communities, and about 80% of our Indigenous communities or Indigenous people live in remote or scattered or isolated areas, which makes management very, very tricky. So there is actually no real national mandate for safe drinking water in these communities. Unlike the urban areas, there's no actual legal requirement to follow the Australian drinking water guidelines, which is quite generally states or local government do try and follow those guidelines and try and mandate that, but it's actually can be very difficult for some of the reasons the other panellists spoke about as well. We have a three-tiered government, so we've got the federal government, we've got the state government, and then we've got local authorities. We've also got many advocacy groups, many water groups, and many Indigenous nation groups and organisations, and it is, as a result, particularly fragmented. And that fragmentation really leads to inconsistent policy application, unclear accountability, which is a really big thing, I think, is that accountability. As you mentioned, it's everyone's responsibility, but it's actually no one's responsibility because it is so fragmented. And this is particularly so in these remote regions where it might take a large plane and then a small plane, and then a really small plane, which is quite unnerving, to get to one community. So if there is a broken pipe, and it's not a key area, so it's not in a hospital or maybe at the school, those pipes can remain unfixed, not fixed or attended to for weeks, months, years. I think 30 years you might have mentioned there, Dane. So again, very similar problems. The policy bias, there is a policy bias again. There's familiarity here to those centralised systems. It's much easier to manage one big thing and follow those technical kind of procedures and get everyone trained up in your A to B, C of engineering and wastewater management and so on. It's much, much harder, but possibly more effective and more appropriate to have more discrete or decentralised systems. But The policy relates to the larger centralised systems. They relate to urban centres and they relate to people who are trained sufficiently and enough redundancy or capability to maintain those systems. There's a disconnection from Indigenous governance and rights and knowledge, I should say, as well. Policy frameworks have certainly not adequately incorporated Indigenous water governance rights or decision making. It's not easy to do, absolutely not, but things that aren't easy doesn't mean to say they shouldn't be done. And we've found in smaller projects or smaller case studies where Indigenous knowledge and co-design, they're all sort of words you use, but when actually you do collaborate well and co-design well, we've seen far more impressive outcomes in terms of understanding of water demand management, water conservation, water quality testing, water quality reporting and so on. So those water policy and allocation frameworks do largely ignore Indigenous water values and focus on those economic and environmental outcomes, and they don't have to be mutually exclusive. If we look at the circular economy and we look at ways where we can have social enterprise matched with good water management and good water governance, there's a few examples out there. So drinking water management policies similarly treat communities as service recipients rather than self-determining communities. Funding and responsibility gaps are also an issue. Has that gone to 2 minutes yet? No. I thought you were being rude to me then, but that was 3 fingers. All right. Funding and responsibility gaps, infrastructure and maintenance funding for water systems is short term, it's spread across multiple departments. Money is being increased, and there's positives that hopefully we'll get to. So certainly when we talk about funding, it has absolutely increased in the last few years, no doubt about it. How that money is managed is still a little dubious. Who manages that money is still a little bit dubious. It's often still seen through and administrated through that Western framework of people making decisions in Canberra, that's our capital in Canberra, who have never ever been to any of these communities or never ever really engaged with where that money might go. So like technology, money is important, but it's certainly not everything. And limited monitoring, data and training. I think we're talking about data later, or generally that importance of data, and that kind of gets to a sticky point with that data. Indigenous knowledge is data, so there's the IP issues around that and the ID sovereignty around that as well. I've got a few PhD students who are looking into this area because it's a really emerging area, particularly in Australia, which is a good thing because we are starting to get the idea now, hey, we need to include Indigenous knowledge and we need to include all of that cultural and all of that valuable information that has been handed down and indeed in different climates over the last 60,000 years. You've got a lot of sort of not quite dramatic climate change as we've got now, but certainly all of that knowledge is data. How do we manage that data in a way that's equitable and fair? Finally, really in summary, and we could turn this around in a positive way and say insights to improve the situation are to defragment the responsibilities, to change that policy bias, to increase Indigenous inclusion. The funding isn't great, and where it is good, to really think about how we're best using that money, not just throwing it at a problem and hoping it'll go away, because if that was the case, it wouldn't have been a problem, because a lot of money has been thrown at it over the years. That monitoring, that data, the two-tiered system, and that generally leads to that systemic inequity. But I think more communication, more relationship building, more genuine inclusion of our First Nations people with decision making, I think it's not easy to do, but it will go a long way to help improve the equity of water in remote communities. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Beale. Really appreciate it. Quick audience poll. Who's feeling a little bad about all this data that you're hearing? Our intention today is really not to make anybody feel like, oh no, I'm not paying attention to something, or this is an issue that I work in the international space. How could I never have heard of this issue in the first place? We're not here to stand up here and preach about all the bad things that are happening across the world, because that's not why any of us are empowered to do anything. I think all of us are motivated by solutions, by reframing issues as opportunities, by working for our communities and working together to be able to pull together what we need to do to solve these gaps in conjunction with community. And I really want to emphasize what Dr. Beal mentioned there, particularly at the end, around the fact that we need to look at this as a co-development of solutions. This isn't any one government, any one sector, any group that swoops down to work and fix a problem in any country or any context. It's a collaboration. It's collective action. It's the fact that we need to be able to take the expertise and the historical context that we all understand and combine it together to be able to solve. And as you might be able to tell, I was also stalling while I pull up Elias's presentation. But I want to use that shift towards the narrative that we're hoping to spend the rest of this time on today, is that what we need to be working on is solutions, and what we need to focus on is where we go from here. So shutting on Elias's presentation and then going into our Q&A, we're going to take some time to explore where the future lies, where we need to go, and how we can solve it together. And to start there, we wanted to investigate what promising solutions look like globally. So we're very lucky to have Lamesa fly in all the way from Ethiopia to join us for this panel. And Lamesa Nkonta is a country director for IRC WASH Ethiopia. He has diversified and hands-on experience in water resources, water supplies, and sanitation, working for a lot of sectors, including government, business, and NGOs in various capacities. Key areas of his expertise include strategic planning, partnership management and coordination, business development and management, program and project management, study and design on rural and urban water utilities, and much more. He's a hydrogeologist by background with over 25 years of experience in the WASH sector. Please welcome Lamesa.
Thank you. I would like to thank DigDeep for organizing this session and inviting me to talk. I still want to be sure that everyone is here because I'm the last presenter. Yes, you are there. Thank you. So I'm going to share you 2 points. One is the entire policy context and under which context we are operating in Ethiopia for water, sanitation, and hygiene. This is a general one. And the second one is how policy and the strategies for water and the sanitation have been evolving to bring progressive results in the country. In line with that, I will start with the first one. Every country, they set policy, they design policy and implement policy based on the priorities and the goals they have, irrespective of whatever development policies they have. They usually target their priorities and the goals and also follow different approaches. In our case, in Ethiopia, for example, it mainly focuses on economic transformation and the poverty reduction. That includes industrialization, agriculture modernization, export diversification, job creation. All of this actually based on improved wider public services, which include water, sanitation, hygiene, school, and the public health. Still, it is good to understand under which conditions we are operating. There are a number of challenges. One is related to capacity, institutional capacity to realize or implement these policies. Second one, there are always many competing priorities to implement these policies. So all these limitations really sometimes compromise the priority areas to implement the policies. Sometimes like short-term intervention takes over like long-term development aspect. Emergency responses like take over development. Basic services over improving and sustaining services are some compromising issue due to competing priorities. Coming to water, sanitation, and hygiene, our policies, strategies at national level have been evolving through time based on the actual learning we have been having in the country. Like other countries, we have like water resource management policies. The previous one was almost 25 years, and the new one is being under finalization. While implementing that policy, we have been learning all the time. and changing national level strategies and approach for like universal water sanitation and hygiene coverage. WASH, as part of like wider development plan, it is part of the wider development plan. For example, the current 10 years plan we have is for 2021, 2020, 30. Water sanitation and hygiene is part of that wider national plan. There is also a standalone WASH dedicated policies and strategies at national level. If you have looked at this diagram, it shows how that policy or strategy have been evolving through time. The first one, it is a project-based, it is a random, and also it is a kind of demand, it is supply-driven. Supply-driven, project-based, short-term intervention. That didn't work much. Then we moved to still supply-driven, project-based, but well-planned. That is the second step. The third one is demand-driven, program-based approach. And finally, now we are at a stage of demand-driven, well-planned, harmonized, and sector-wide approach. We have learned all this like for the last 25 years plus in the country. So based on this, currently we have a so-called One WASH national program in the country that has been under implementation since 2013. So all this evolution has really helped us to learn and to adopt the real situation in the country. This has like three pillars. The first one is on resources related to like budget, finance, and so on. Second one is the enabling environment, and the third one is the capacity. It has also principles, alignment, for example, aligning priority, aligning support or collaboration with government priorities, irrespective of from where we are, be it NGOs, be it private sectors or donors. Everyone needs to align with government priorities. Second one is integration. It is about integrating WASH, water, sanitation, and hygiene for communities, institutions, and WASH away from home. Third one is harmonization. Harmonization in terms of planning and reporting. And the final one is partnership, which is, of course, mentioned many times, multiple times, around collective action. Unless we put our efforts together, really, we can't bring change. So one of the key things we have learned while implementing the country's policies was like the necessities, the critical necessities of collective action. The One WASH national program, we are now at the third stage. Even the program itself has been evolving over time. In the first place, it didn't have much around post-construction support, around operation and maintenance, and the focus was on capital investment, on new infrastructure development. But during the second phase, which was from 2016 to 2019, it included the post-construction support around climate resilient WASH, sustainability, and others. Now we are about to finish the second phase, and the third phase is about to begin, which has incorporated about result-based financing. So it is not only the policy, but the program itself has been evolving since 2013 to change in terms of content and approach. The other aspect is the focus areas of this content. One is resilience, not only towards climate, but towards every shocks, because water sanitation is the key point or the entry point towards building communities' resilience, both in urban and the rural area. Second one, improved services. Third, equity. Of course, unlike in developed country, in our case, out of 130 million people, only 20% are living in town areas, in urban areas. The remaining 80% are living in rural areas. Sustainability is another issue, universal coverage. Maybe something I need to mention here is around we don't have really as such a clear demarcated geographical areas in terms of underserved. It is dispersed everywhere. If you take a single city, there are peoples who are served and there are peoples who are not served for different reasons. Otherwise, we don't have really some kinds of categories which were presented before. That is something that makes it a bit different. Second one, it is a government-led approach through decentralized service provision. We have 4 levels of government layers: national, regional, zone, and the district level. Even beyond that, there is the community level government structures. So power and the mandate are given at different levels with different scopes. Another one is around the engagement toward these collective actions, like government, donors, NGOs, businesses, communities. In line with this, there is also a component called consolidated wash account, where everyone who is willing to do that is injecting fund for the implementation of water sanitation and hygiene. Of course, this program is not rigid, it is flexible with whatever interest or whoever actor comes to support. It allows also, you can use your fund to support that government policies and strategies. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, La Mesa. I appreciate it. So I think as folks are seeing, you can see the deeper similarities. Where did that go? Well, that's fine. You know our faces by now. You can see the deeper similarities that may persist between high-income nations, as Dr. Beal was mentioning, and Wendy and Dane, and also in lower and middle-income contexts as they may apply globally as well. So we're going to take that context and move into a larger discussion for the room for the remainder time. Given our timing and given it's post-lunch, I think we're going to just straight up open it for the audience to be able to ask any questions. Now, we'll incentivize you again because you just had lunch, maybe you didn't yet have dessert. We have some candy if you ask a question, but also even cooler than that, we have a book that Dr. Beal has written, a children's book on the importance of water and sanitation that you can either give to your own children, to a family friend. My brother and his wife are about to give birth in a couple of weeks, and I stole one of the books already. So please use this mic so that the folks online can listen to your questions, but head on up if you have anything. Thank you. And look, I have some questions, so I can get all the candy and the books otherwise. Thank you. A brave volunteer in the back.
Hi, my name is Catherine Alfredo. I'm from the University of South Florida, and I had a question for Wendy. I know you did a lot of work with the state revolving funds. Is there a point in that process where it just gets lost? Like the states can't, like the utilities don't have the capacity to apply for the funding, and the funding kind of gets lost in that state revolving fund? And is there a way to get out of that kind of loop?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had kind of mentioned the state banks that I talked about with the bipartisan infrastructure law, and that's what Catherine was referencing, the state revolving funds. That's an interesting way to describe it, and pretty accurate, I think, in some cases. We have, as I mentioned, right, the 50 states. I also should have mentioned, too, that tribes, territories, also get funding, and they run their own programs for this as well. So when you diffuse the funds out to the 50 plus state and tribal and territorial banks, each one of them runs their own process, and it's different between clean water and drinking water. So now you're up to like 110 different banks who all kind of do it their own way. And absolutely things get lost in that. Some states run a really competitive, really data-driven program. They tie it back to their state water plans. They do a lot of work and effort to make sure that they're funding projects that are going to be tied to positive outcomes in their state. These are really old programs, though. They've been around for like 20 plus years, 25 years. And some of them are in a place of complacency where they have a bit of an antiquated process for how they choose and select projects, how projects even come to them. And so I do think, modernizing how we fund and using maybe a more data-driven approach, or one that is tied to like positive outcomes. This is something that I was like constantly battling when I was at US EPA, was number one, tracking a dollar through the system, next to impossible to do, which is a real shame. So it gets back to like some of the data issues. But two, was what has that dollar done, right? Okay, it built a new water treatment plant. Is that water treatment plant in compliance? Do we know? Can we trace that? Can we trace that back to lower instances of disease in the community? Can we trace that back to higher water quality, right? Like, what are the things that we're trying to move the needle on, and how are we making sure that the dollars that we're putting into the system are actually doing that? That is a next to impossible question to answer, I will say, nationwide. I think there are some places that can maybe answer that on a like local specific way, but it's certainly not aggregated. And I think if we could fix that feedback loop, that would be tremendous. But what I will say is there is not a ton of political will to do that based on how our leaders are voted in and voted out. You are looking for shovel ready. Can you do it tomorrow? Can I have this on a poster board for my meeting next Thursday with the city council? You know, whatever it is, you are looking for immediate stuff, and that is not always the project. The fundable projects are not always the right ones. And so we are kind of stuck, I think, in a tough pattern when it comes to water infrastructure investment in this country. And it does perpetuate, I think, a lot of the issues that we see today and the challenges we're trying to solve.
And I'll butt in as moderator to add a little context too. Therein, what Wendy mentioned too, provides a promising opportunity to, particularly if we focus on any given group, so say the 2+ million Americans that don't have any running water. All these gaps that Wendy has mentioned, following the dollar, being able to understand where it goes, being able to see the impact, be able to see how it goes towards data, is possible because we have a general figure that we know, around 2.2 million. It could be upwards of 10 million. That's a data problem that we need to talk about at some point. But therein lies an opportunity to be able to almost design something from scratch in a way that they couldn't conceive even 100 years ago, right? We can think about things like operations and maintenance long-term. We can think about things like sustainability, climate change impacts, all these pieces of knowing that that dollar is going to go really far because we're at the smartest we've ever been, right? Now is the time for us to design resilient systems, sustainable systems, affordable systems that could be put in from scratch in communities that don't yet have them or have fallen offline. So there's maybe a little silver lining.
Yeah, and I should maybe say, I mean, I again hate to paint like a grim picture of this, but like, 97% of Americans are drinking safe water. So like, I don't want to lose that. Like, we have done an excellent job as a country of making sure if I travel to an Airbnb in Minnesota, I feel pretty confident drinking the tap water. I think that is an excellent mark of progress in our country. But now we're to the point that Dane made earlier about how do we get that 1% to 2% that's left. So now we're faced with, I think, the really tough problems. And so I do just want to highlight, like, the SRFs are great. They do a lot of good work. Could they be better? 1,000%.
Shout out Minnesota. Our next question. And I apologize. If you do ask a question, please feel free to come up to the mic. And after the session, come up for your candy or book.
You had me at book. So you were basically alluding to this before with the changing tides with politics and funding, and that just makes me wonder if you could talk about what role the communities really have in providing stable thoughts and decision making to hopefully allow for policies that can persist across space and time when government agencies can change over time, and so can funding. And how can we as implementers work on communities towards gaining some of that knowledge and access to either do more voluntary policies, things that continue, or help for there to be more leadership to go towards additional regulations and implementation strategies.
Yeah, I know you do a lot of good policy work.
Please.
So great question. You know, one thing I would encourage is anywhere you are engaging with local communities to make sure that the local government officials know the issues. I cannot tell you how many times when we're working in, whether it be deep South Alabama, Appalachia, Australia, Navajo Nation, where you will go to Albuquerque, just a couple hours outside of Navajo Nation, and they have no idea that there are hundreds of thousands of people without drinking water less than 2 hours away. I mean, that's regular. That's absolutely happens. When we go and talk to even federal elected officials about this issue, they have no idea it's happening. And so it makes it more challenging if you have a solution to these problems, and the funding may go through the state or the city council or the county commissioners, if they don't even know it's a real issue. And all of a sudden they have some NGO or some organizational group coming in to say, hey, we want to do this. They'll be like, is this even an issue? So the education is so great that needs to happen. So, and my biggest thing is you've got to make sure that the people with the ability to make decisions are knowing the issues and have the data and have the support. And, you know, that's why when you do projects, you invite these elected officials out to the sites. You say, hey, come to a ribbon cutting. You come to see a school being retrofitted with a filtration system, see something coming online, because for them to see it makes real impact, because then they become your advocate at the city level, at the state level, at the regulatory level. And if you don't do that, then you're really pushing a rock uphill.
No one else want to approach it?
Thank you so much. I've been really enjoying this session. I have one comment, which might lead to a question and then a second question. The project I'm working on, we're relying hopefully on SRF funds to fund a lot of the projects we're working on with communities. And something we're running into, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Wendy, is the communities that are, or the utilities that are able to put together the massive application that's required. Yes, they need improvements, but they're often doing way better. And so the communities that don't have the capacity to put the application together get left behind. So you talked about how the EPA shifted from compliance and enforcement to TA. I'm interested if you've felt like that's really helped with the problem I just described. And then the second thing was I never thought about the fragmentation at the federal level, the way you described it. And I was just curious if you had a solution idea for that, not to put you on the spot, or if that's a whole separate session. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure some of my other panelists might have some thoughts on that one too. But to your first question, which was about, I'm sorry, it was again the SRFs, and it was kind of the smaller projects versus.
Right, like how the smaller projects,
Yeah.
Those communities don't have the capacity to apply, so they get left behind.
Right.
The EPA shift to helping the TA.
Oh yeah, like how that's making an impact. Yeah. It's a good question. I think one, I'll say yes, I do think it has definitely helped. I mean, we have new applicants to these programs, which is a great sign, right? People who have never been at the table when it comes to federal funding before, communities who have never heard of these programs are now applying. So I think that yes, that it has helped in that sense. But the other thing I'll say is it takes years of this work. I mean, you guys know who are working in communities, capacity building in a community is a multi-decadal project, right? I mean, multiple years if you're lucky, a couple decades or more in some cases. And so I think, having an injection of 3 years of federally funded technical assistance is only going to do so much. So I think sustaining that work, sustaining that network of what we in the last administration started to build, there has to be a federal commitment to maintain that. Otherwise, I think you do lose momentum, you lose progress, you break trust. I mean, the worst thing to do is to be in a community for 2 years helping them with something and suddenly disappear. Okay, great. That's not, I think, a recipe for success at all. So I will say this administration has continued to fund the work that we set up in the last administration when it comes to water and the technical assistance pieces. But I will also flag that that money runs out in FY26, so next year. It takes a little while to get through the system, so we've got maybe a couple of years of cushion, but in the meantime, me and my water lobbyist colleagues are all trying to push in Congress to continue funding this because it is so important. And then your second question was?
Yeah, I'm going to invoke my power of moderator to elevate that to across various countries. So looking at promising policy solutions that are either in any of your contexts. Lamesa, you talked a bit about one wash. Are there other federal strategies at the national level in Ethiopia that have worked well? And Dr. Beal, as well for you in Australia, what are some maybe promising solutions that have moved the path forward towards universal water access as well?
You see, like I mentioned already, the principles, especially the integration, alignment, harmonization, and the partners. When you expand those 4 pillars, they are really, they help a lot. Around partnership, it is mainly to drive collective action, just to avoid fragmentation and to bring every actors together. Alignment is aligning everything with government's priority, irrespective of whatever resources we have, whatever geographical intervention we want, whatever problems we want to address. As long as we are able to align with government priorities, we can bring really measurable impact. And another one is harmonization. This is around capturing what we have invested in, joint planning. It could be annual planning, or it could be 2 years planning, and also reporting. Whatever we implement, whatever we invest in, we need to properly capture and properly report in a harmonized way, in which case we can really measure and track the changes. Integration, of course, sanitation, hygiene, and water supply are inseparable. Whenever we plan for water supply, maybe we need to think of the hygiene, the sanitation component. And in the same way, whenever we plan for sanitation and the hygiene, we need to do the same. So our national strategy or plan has evolved like for the last 13 years to reach at this level. It's like more of learning and adapting through time, and we'll continue to do that. And yeah, maybe that could be a solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Luisa. And to add to that and contextualize it for the United States and Canada as well, and particularly on the points of collective action, harmonization, as well as developing the national strategy, we in the United States, and I'm doing a plug for the Vessel Collective really quickly, so I apologize, but the Vessel Collective is working on right now in conjunction with about 100 organizations on a national strategy to close the water access gap in the US, starting with that 2 million folks, directly inspired by programs like One Wash in Ethiopia and other places around the world as well, taking the lessons that we've been able to understand around collective party action, around being able to work with one another, around many of the panelists said it during their presentations, but it takes an army, right? It takes private sector, public sector, nonprofits, and every expert in between and outside of there to be able to fit into a national strategy and think of the long-term benefit. And I know Canada has taken some action at the national level to create a Canada Water Agency, which is looking into the issues on a wider scale and trying to develop that harmonization that needs to be done in order to close a gap like this. So, Dr. Beal, do you want to speak to any Australian? No? Great. Perfect. Yeah, please, next question.
Thank you. My question is about quality compliance standards and enforcement of those. So, I heard you talking about, markets being flooded with non-compliant wash-related parts, and at this conference there have been, 20, 30 presentations about lead in pipes, including, in studies conducted at this school with components purchased locally. And I heard you say that, the EPA is responsible for enforcement, but it almost seems like some of these things are more a question of like consumer product safety and other things like that. So how do wash organizations, interact with these issues where the accountability is seemingly with policy organizations outside of our experience and jurisdiction?
If I can take that one really quick. So yeah, you're right. I mean, this is an issue. It's not just in the wash space, but across the globe, there are non-compliant products. You're talking children's toys and many other products that are out there. But one of the things, coming from a certification body, making sure that these products are certified, making sure they are compliant with a standard. To be able to have that, because generally speaking, like usually in, you know, high income countries like Australia and the United States and others, a lot of the times it's, while parts of the law are regulated at the federal level, like EPAC and the flow rates and lead law, there's also construction code requirements which are done at a city and local level. So a lot of that sometimes falls down to, you know, the building inspector, the plumbing inspector, to come and inspect the buildings before it can have occupancy and use. But there's also another issue we're running into, which it makes it even more complex, is that we're seeing a prevalence of non-compliant products on e-commerce sites. You know, I'm not going to name names, but there's a couple big ones that you could probably guess who sells a lot and just had a bunch of layoffs. But they had, you know, a group of us within this coalition bought, you know, plumbing products off the shelf, off the mark, off of one of the e-commerce sites, and over half of them were not compliant with federal law. And so we've been in discussions with Congress. The Congress did a hearing on this where they had some major manufacturers there, Amazon. Now we're working more and more with Amazon, Overstock, Lowe's, all these other ones to try to ratchet down the ability, because that's a major issue. But, you know, if you're not in that space, if you're building a widget or a product or a pipe or a filter, there are standards out there. You know, if there's not standards out there, you know, there's standards bodies that develop those standards to make sure it can meet a minimum safety standard, then make sure it's compliant and brought into that. So I'm happy to talk more about that, but that's a significant issue. I mean, and can you imagine like the issues that we have in the United States and Australia and England with non-compliant products? Like if you're in LMICs, like you're in a real big pickle, because how do you have that enforcement mechanism? Because even in the United States, when we have the ability to have enforcement, we still have enforcement issues, much less if you don't have that enforcement arm and mechanism, it's just the Wild West of products coming in. And so it's a significant issue. So it really comes incumbent upon sometimes the organization doing those products. Like, you know, World Vision has spoken a lot about how they said any product, regardless of where they're putting it in, they said any product that they put in their projects throughout the world, they are going to make sure it's certified to be lead free or whatever else. So they're taking it upon themselves as a kind of a de facto enforcement body, saying we're not going to be responsible for this. We're responsible for putting them in a village somewhere in Africa. We're going to make sure it's compliant and safe, instead of relying upon the local governments to do it.
Thank you. Please, next question.
Fantastic. So I guess a little bit of context. So I'm a PhD student at Virginia Tech, second year, so getting started on my projects here. Me and my lab mates were doing research on both drinking water and wastewater in rural Appalachia. And I guess my biggest question is, as we're kind of getting started into our projects, is what data or what projects are you guys seeing that are actually making a change, or like what data is changing minds?
I'm happy to say that. Yeah, incredible question, and a very important question that we should be centering as we go into any project or any community that we're working with. We at DigDeep, we provide hot and cold clean running water to households that don't have any infrastructure that's failed to a point where it's not even regulated anymore. There's some really key pieces there, particularly on the data element that you mentioned. I mean, I'm a little biased. Our projects are making a difference on the ground. We're not the only ones to dig deep. There are many organizations around the country that are working, whether it's the engineering component, whether it's the water supply component. There's so many pieces of a water system that are really critical, that are more complicated than a centralized system, because you have water access points, you have pickup, you have regulation from there, you have considerations that people may not have immediately, like whether you have a paved road to be able to get to your water, or the fact that you may not have electricity in your home. So even if you do have a water system, it may not function correctly based on your needs there. So our assessments are always based on that fuller need. If it's a home that has entirely no infrastructure, we'll develop the project from start to finish. So on the Navajo Nation, for instance, we provide individual home water systems that all of the infrastructure is put in by our organization. So from pipes in the ground, from a water cistern that we install there, to a brand new bathroom that we put in there, that's all solar powered because of the amount of sun that the reservation gets. But the data component is a really critical piece because there's such a national level element to this, all the way down to the local level. Data, at least in the United States, and we've talked about this a bit in the international context as well, data in the United States is getting worse when it comes to water and sanitation. Since 1990, we've removed more questions about water and sanitation from the census, from the American Community Survey, even things like the USGS and other surveys at the federal level are taking. That makes it very difficult to actually measure what we're doing if we're not going into community and understanding exactly what the scale of the problem is. That 2 million figure that we keep dropping out there is a very conservative estimate. It could be upwards of 10 million if you're looking at JMP calculations. And that is causing significant ripple effects. There's a major economic impact. Nearly $9 billion a year is lost to our GDP because of that gap. So the data implications are really critical in terms of being able to understand it at that federal level. So we need better federal data in the United States. I know Canada, that 90 times number that I mentioned is an old figure, but I checked with the Canada Water Agency a couple of weeks ago, and they just don't have an updated figure from the 90s because their data collection is also getting worse. I'll give a quick anecdote. Looking at a community we work with in West Virginia in McDowell County, we know for a fact there's thousands of households that face water or sanitation issues, more than likely both. And yet, the most recent ACS, due to the data collection that happened during the pandemic, due to restrictions, due to the questions that were removed, estimated with a close to 70% margin of error that there were probably a dozen households that didn't have complete plumbing. I don't know what you do with that, right? If 70% margin of error itself as a part of a data stream, you can't work with that data to be able to solve anything. But that's where local data, local organizations, local governments, and state governments have a real opportunity to be able to work in sustainable and appropriate data collection. I'll give a quick shout out to Johns Hopkins University's Center for Indigenous Health, who's partnering with DigDeep, the Navajo Nation, and others to do census-like data collection. I call it census-like because it's not as limiting as the census. It goes into really deep data that's made by the community, for the community, and conducted by folks in the community to be able to get holistic data from start to finish that we can safely manage, responsibly manage, and also utilize from beginning to end. And I don't want to take too much more time. I'm happy to talk about data for hours.
Hello, I'm Carly. I'm also from Virginia Tech, and I guess this will be pretty quick because I think you kind of just answered my question, but I was also just really interested in this idea of we have such conservative and low estimates on where we don't have water. And so, yeah, I was just curious on ways that we might be able to find those communities, but this like half census thing sounds really cool. But I'll let the next question go. But yeah, I think the whole data thing is a really big issue.
Yeah, very much so. We just need stronger data collection no matter what. So as Dane was saying before, if you're working with a local municipality, local community, state, federal, it doesn't matter what it is, we need data to be collected. And more importantly, we need data to be utilized. It can't just be collected and thrown something. And yeah, I was about to.
But I think even more importantly, that data needs to be good quality. Because you can collect stamps, you can collect as much data as you like, but if it's not good quality and representative, it's the academic coming out of me, but really repeatable and scalable and so on, then it's dangerous. It can be a bit dangerous. But yeah, we know that. This gentleman's been waiting very patiently.
Right, no problem. I've been waiting. Thank you so much for all the panelists. Good, interesting debates. My name is Seydina, and I'm from Senegal, the director of a think tank locally based in Dakar. And I'm work in a consortium with 7 African countries on the similar issues funded by the Gate Foundations. I have one comment and one question. The first comment is I couldn't agree more with my sister in the first day of panel that we have to work with governments no matter what. And I think NGOs, think tank are in a unique place to actually offer the bridge because sometimes community are very far from policymakers. Academics also are very far from communities. And then how do we make sure that all the stakeholders can come to the same issues, what matters, access to waters and sanitations. And I see the question in Ethiopia, the policy is shifting quite rapidly over the 10 years. What was the trigger and what is the role of data why is it actually shifting that fast? And do you think that this is the final destination for policy shifting right now, because you are harmonizing? And the second question is about data that I have actually. My experience working with governments is sometimes they claim, and especially from the NSO office, National Statistics, that the data collected by NGOs and then think tank do not actually follow the methodologies or structures of the official administrative data. And sometimes it's hard to actually bring them together, even though the data that we collected have evidence and then show really where problems are in issues and can even be disaggregated while they can. What are your experience in closing the gap? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, a two-parter. We only have a short amount of time left, so if you are able to stay for a minute, we would appreciate that. So let me say, and maybe Dr. Beal can approach it, but what was the trigger for the change in your government's approach towards universal wash and the role of data in that as well?
Yeah, thank you. Wash, water, sanitation, and hygiene is part of good governance. If you are able to deliver those services, it is part of it is an indicator or indicators for good governance. If those communities are underserved, be it in rural or urban areas, you know what could happen because they request government. So it is a demand driven. That is number one. If those services, piped water supply fails in a tower or in a city, immediately the dwellers would ask the municipality or the immediate utility because it is part of government services. In Ethiopia, again, most of the public services are government-led. So it doesn't give time really. So there is a high pressure, demand from community, requesting government utilities, municipalities to stand and to think and to provide solutions. That's number one. Number two, it is driven by learning and adaptation from what we had been implementing. Of course, I need to mention here about data as well. We have been trying to establish national wash management information system that haven't gone well so far, but we are still trying. But irrespective of the data source, be it from CSO or NGO or be it from private sector, it has to be streamlined with government national MIS system.
Yeah, so in Australia, thank you. In Australia, we're also very, there is, quite a lot of growing impetus on the importance of you can't manage what you can't measure, but everything that you measure doesn't necessarily matter. So there's, and it depends who you ask as well. You asked a really good question, I think. What sort of, I think it was the community, what does the community want in terms of data? The community might want to know, well, what is our water quality like, and is it compliant, and is it not just seasonally bad or good, or let's get a year-round look at how our water is compliant. But then you might have, say, for example, the most funding I've got around water is through energy companies, because the diesel required to power the water supplies and just general remote communities is subsidised. So and then they have to pay that subsidy to make sure there's parity and everyone pays $1 per kilowatt hour, etc. So they want to know how much water is being used. They don't really care about the quality of it. Because they're the energy company, of course they do, but they want to know how much water is being used in these remote communities, what's the diesel penalty, what's the consumption, etc., etc. So, it is important to know what sort of data you're after and how it can help solve those problems. But I think the more we know, the more we can manage, and certainly, we're getting good funding for it as well, which is good. It's just got to be the right kind of questions.
I'll say one more piece on data before I pass it back to the rest of my panelists to close this out. But I've heard time and again from communities and community organizations that folks are sick of data collection being the end and being the only focus. Data collection is a part of the whole system. So if we're looking at any kind of strategy, whether it be a national strategy that's holistic and closing something, or maybe a local piece, data is not the only important element. It can't be the end-all, be-all. It can't be a report that sits on someone's shelf. It has to be part of the overall function, because a lot of communities, especially those that have been left behind for so long, they know the problems. They know the scale of the issue. They may not know the exact number at the end of the day, but that's meant to be found out as we're building solutions, not just identifying problems forever. And so before we close out, I apologize that we went a few minutes over. I want to give the last word to the rest of the panelists. What's one charge to the room you would give for everyone as they walk out? Something to go look up, something to go start doing in one quick sentence. I'll give mine so that they can have a second to think. If you don't know about the water access or sanitation access issues in your country, in your neighborhood, in your state, wherever it might be, go look it up. It is not hard to discover. Oh, I stole yours.
Ditto.
So I'll maybe more than one sentence, but I will say coordinate and collaborate with partners. That's so critical. The water industry, the water space is one of the most fragmented industries I've ever seen. I mean, you look at other industries like the electrical or energy industry, they are, it's not as complex as our issues. They can turn on electricity, run a line, and it's there, right? It's not about quantity, quality, there's so many parameters within it. So we're innately a fragmented industry. But we also make it harder on ourselves because we don't talk a lot with each other. If I'm a filtration person, I'm not talking to the supply person, and you're not coming together as a coalition to say, let's look at this from a whole level and get everyone on the same page. So work across your industry, across the wash sector to make a difference.
Okay, I'll say to my international friends, thank you for making the trip. To my Americans, I will say, please call your congressperson and tell them you want more water funding. Simple, that's all it takes. And if you don't know the number, come find me and I will give you their number.
Yeah, engage your leaders or politicians at whatever level you are, especially if you are a technical person. Don't undermine the engagement of leaders and the politicians, be it at local level or be it at high level. Yeah, thank you.
Well said, everyone. Please give a huge round of applause to our panelists. Thank you. And if you asked a question, please come get your reward at the front.
Well, I finally got sick.
We can't afford more questions.
We have a limited quantity.
Maybe I need to learn also really how the revolving fund at utility level is working. Maybe if you have some time during coffee tea break, really happy to learn more.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you, it was really interesting that you said the One Water
One Wash
National
National
Plan,
Program.
One Wash
Yeah.
National Plan
Yeah.
was driven by
Government.
people demanding it?
No.
People demanding better service?
Yes, people demanding better service, and the government, in order to respond to that service, so government has to design and lead that plan.
But it was the people who
Yes,
said,
yes,
we
yes.
want better service.
It is like poor service. Poor service, like reliability, quality.